Mira, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you to our colleagues from Georgia for these really interesting remarks, and thank you, Mira, for doing such a great job moderating this discussion. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Maya Tarashvili. I'm the Deputy Director of Research here at the Foreign Policy Research Institute. We're going to switch over to our panel 2 discussion. So I'm going to take just a moment of a pause, if you don't mind, while we wait for the rest of our speakers to join us. Will take us just a moment and we'll get started with panel 2. In the meantime, what I can do is introduce our panel 2 participants, and then we'll be ready to get started. So for panel 2, I'll be joined by David Kramer, who is a senior fellow in the Václav Havel Program for Human Rights and Diplomacy and Director of European and Eurasian Studies at Florida International University. Previously, he served as president of Freedom House and also worked at the McCain Institute and the German Marshall Fund of the United States. We're also joined by Ambassador Ian Kelly, who is a retired Foreign Service officer, and he last served as the U.S. ambassador to Georgia from 2015 to 2018. He previously served as the U.S. ambassador to the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe from 2010 to 2013. We're also joined by Dato Sikharulidze, who is former Georgian ambassador to the United States and also former Minister of Defense of Georgia. He's a member of the board of the Atlantic Council of Georgia, the co-sponsor of this event, and also a member of a political movement, DROA, It's Time. We're also joined by Batu Kutelia, who is a member of the board of the Atlantic Council of Georgia and Next Generation Leader Fellow at the McCain Institute for International Leadership. He served as the Deputy Secretary of the National Security Council of Georgia between 2011 and 2013. He was also the ambassador of Georgia to the United States and served as the first Deputy Minister of Defense and later as the Minister of Defense and Foreign Affairs. And those were between 06-07, and he was also the Deputy Minister of State Security in 04. The longer versions of these bios are on our website. I think our speakers have these impressive backgrounds, and this is what really makes them excellent participants in this panel, because we have some tough questions to answer. I think, hearing the first panel discussion can be a little bit disheartening, especially for those of you who may have followed Georgia for years and know that it's been a sort of a bright star in the South Caucasus for democratic progress. So my questions are, is this really the time when our resolve is truly tested? The US commitment to supporting democracy at home and abroad, and should the Biden administration see these challenges as a call to action or as a reason to retreat? We spent some time discussing Georgia, but we haven't gotten to talking about another pressing issue in the South Caucasus, and that's the conflict in the Nagorno-Karabakh. It's been just about a year since that conflict broke into another active war for a few weeks, and we ended up with greater Russian participation in resolving that conflict, and now we have Russian peacekeeping forces in Nagorno-Karabakh. So I'm going to turn it over to Ambassador Kelly, who will walk us through where we stand with Nagorno-Karabakh at the moment and what policy options the US may still have despite its near complete disengagement from it. Then I will turn it over to David Kramer, afterwards Batu Kutelia and Dato Sikharulidze, and then we'll leave some time, the second half an hour, for audience Q&A. So I would like to ask our audience members to be active, send in your questions using the Q&A feature, and I'm going to get to as many of them as I can. So with that, let me turn it over to Ambassador Kelly. Welcome to FPRI, and thank you for agreeing to join this discussion.
Well, thanks very much, Maya, and thank you to the FPRI for hosting this very interesting and very topical discussion. As Maya said, I was at the OSCE from 2010 to 2013, and in my last year there was a gap between American co-chairs for the Minsk group, which of course is the negotiating format, the agreed to negotiating format for resolving the territorial dispute between Armenia and Azerbaijan. And in my first meeting with the sides in January of 2013, the senior Azerbaijani negotiator took me aside. You know, I was the rookie. That was my first meeting, and he said to me, "Ian, I want to stress one thing, that we have one red line. Baku has one red line, and that's that any kind of peacekeeping operation to separate the sides in a resolution of the conflict cannot include Russian troops." And yeah, I knew why he said that, but he said, "You know as well as I do, when Russian peacekeepers arrive, they never leave." And of course, Moldovans and Georgians and Ukrainians can tell you that. So there was indeed an agreement among the co-chairs, specifically between the US and Russia, that any peacekeeping operation would not include Russian or US troops. And in fact, there was an agreement among all OSCE countries that the OSCE would run the peacekeeping operation. And there was even an office, the ironically named high level planning group. Ironic is it was neither high level nor did it do any planning for a peacekeeping operation. It was established in 1995, and in fact, it still exists. So, you know, I was really quite distressed when I heard that the resolution of the latest war, and of course, I was glad the war stopped, but the resolution included a Russian-only peacekeeping force. I wasn't surprised because of the tendency that I had seen in the Nagorno-Karabakh negotiating format over the last 10 years. I had seen increasingly that the United States and Europe had both subcontracted the negotiating format to Russia. And of course, the West shares some blame for this. When I was co-chair, it was very, very difficult to get any kind of capital attention in either Paris or Washington for bringing the sides together. And there was a recognition that in order to bring these two dug-in sides together, you needed very high-level attention. And under the Obama administration, there was a kind of a transactional approach to any negotiation, that they would not bring in the principal, as we call them, the senior person, whether it's at the White House or the State Department, unless there's some kind of chance of some kind of victory, you know, some kind of diplomatic victory. So we never really got the president or the secretary involved. And the Trump administration, there was basically no attention paid to it. And this was really, I think, exemplified by failing to give the latest US negotiator, failing to give him the ambassadorial title. So he's the only co-chair in the 26-year history of the Minsk group negotiating process who has not had the title of ambassador. So basically, you know, what we have now is the Minsk group is irrelevant. It's been completely marginalized, and as I say, this marginalization was enabled by Washington and Paris. And in the solution to the conflict last year, you have the two great, I don't know if I call them great powers, the two illiberal regional powers, Russia and Turkey, are in the driver's seat in Nagorno-Karabakh. So how does this impact U.S. interests? Well, most obviously, for the first time, you have Russian troops now in all three South Caucasus states. They're there by agreement in two of them, in Armenia and Azerbaijan, and of course in Georgia they are not there by the agreement of the Georgian government. So what you have really here is basically Russia being able to dictate in many ways the foreign policies of the South Caucasus states. And it is not in the U.S. interest, obviously, to have Russia with troops on the ground in all three of these states. One of our big interests here is the southern corridor for Caspian Sea resources. This, of course, we see that Russia is control of all three channels: the northern channel with Nord Stream, the central channel with through Ukraine, and now, of course, they have troops in all three of the South Caucasus states. And then another concern for the U.S. is you have, as I said, the two dominant powers are both illiberal powers, not exactly inclusive, tolerant, democratic powers, Russia and Turkey. And the message that this sends is basically, if you want stability, if you're in the South Caucasus and you want stability, if you want resolution of your problems with territorial integrity and sovereignty, you're not getting any help from the West. If you want resolution, you got to turn to Moscow and or Ankara. And I think that this general disengagement has sent the message that you can get away with a lot in terms of violating democratic principles. You're not going to if you backslide democratically, as Georgia is, quite obviously, there will not be a cost imposed to you. Tbilisi can look at Hungary. Hungary hasn't had a cost imposed on it by the EU, and I think they've made, regrettably, the correct calculation that the United States is not going to impose any costs for violating agreed to democratic principles. So I haven't given up hope. We have a new assistant secretary in the Bureau of European and Eurasian Affairs, and I think it is absolutely critical that the United States stop sending the signal that we're disengaged, and we have to engage, and that's for very, I think, important and tangible national interests in terms of keeping the South Caucasus a place where it's whole and free for democracy, and also for an alternative exit route for Caspian Sea resources. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I want to turn it over to David Kramer. Do you see these challenges in the South Caucasus, policy challenges, as a call to action to engage more, or a good reason to step back and disengage from the Western, and particularly from Washington's perspective?
Well, Maya, first, thanks to you and FPRI and Atlantic Council of Georgia for putting this event together and including me with a great panel here. Ian and I wrote this little book that Nino's organization published, Country on the Verge, the case supporting Georgia. German Marshall Fund also published it here in the US. I think our argument is both harder and easier to make these days. Harder in the sense that Georgia has been moving in the wrong direction domestically, and even possibly in its foreign policy orientation, although to the enormous credit of the Georgian people, the population seems still very rooted in a Euro-Atlantic direction. And that's the harder part. The easier part is, I think all of this argues even more for deeper engagement by the United States to help Georgia, because the US has outsized influence. If we look back on the history of US-Georgia relations, but even looking at the US policy toward the region, the heyday in US-Georgia relations was during the George W. Bush administration, when there was very close communication between President Bush and President Saakashvili, and a visit by President Bush to the country. There hasn't been one at the presidential level since. And yet, for the critics, they would argue that it was an over-personalized relationship. It was less a US-Georgia relationship and more of a Bush-Misha relationship. And of course, the events of November 2007 happened during that time, the Russian invasion in August 2008. So for those who look at it and say it was a wonderful time, there were other issues that balanced that off a bit. President Obama came in, of course, focused on the reset policy with Russia, almost to the exclusion of dealing with other countries in the region. And I think also looking to take a contrasting position from President Bush, and didn't want to particularly deal with President Saakashvili. And then, of course, the famous pivot, later renamed Rebalance, to Asia indicated less interest on the part of the Obama administration, not just toward the Black Sea region and Eurasia, but toward Europe itself. And so I think that indicated that the US during those 8 years was not paying as careful attention as it should have. The Trump administration, Ian mentioned, of course, we had a positive visit by the Vice President Pence. Ian was there at the time, in fact, and a very positive visit, said the right things, sent the right signals. A less positive visit, in fact, I would say a really bad decision to visit, was by Secretary Pompeo in between rounds of the Georgian parliamentary election last November. And it seemed that he had a gap in his schedule and he decided to fill it without thinking through what the implications of that would be. And then, of course, there was no sustained policy toward the region. It depended on the whim of the president to determine what, if anything, the administration would do. And toward Georgia, it was very little. When it comes to the Biden administration, as Ian said, we're still in transition, though we do have, I think, a great new assistant secretary on board. We have, and Karen Donfried. We have a new deputy assistant secretary responsible for this region, replacing George Kent, Erica Olson, who is relatively new to the portfolio, and so we need to give them a little time. But I'll tell you what, the problem is when you come in this far into an administration, you don't have time to play catch up. You have to deal with the current issues as they are, as well as learn from what's just happened. A few quick tests, and I'll end with this, is what will the Biden administration do when it comes to the Summit for Democracy with all three countries? I can't imagine Azerbaijan will be there. It will be interesting to see whether Armenia will be represented. And then if Georgia is represented, do we want the current prime minister there? And so there are some big questions about the representation of these countries, should they be included for the Summit for Democracy, which is December 9th and 10th, virtually not in person. And the last thing, and Nino touched on this in the previous panel, is what do we do with Mr. Ivanishvili? I think not addressing, if you will, the elephant in the room means that we are punting on this. We're kicking this problem down the road. And it seems to me not to pin everything on him. There is some responsibility to be laid on the government and on even some of the opposition forces. But it seems that Mr. Ivanishvili's role has been extremely unhelpful, taking Georgia in the wrong direction politically on the domestic front, and possibly even on the foreign policy front. And the United States, in my view, is the only country, the only government that can address this problem in a serious way. And if we want to help Georgia, I think the time is now to deal with this issue. And so we'll see what happens. I still believe in this argument that Ian and I made, but the circumstances have become more complicated. So let me leave it there. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Let me switch over to Batu Kutelia, who is currently in Georgia. Batu, as you make your remarks, maybe you could also tell us what your take is on moving forward, how the US can most effectively engage with Georgia. What kind of leverage do you think should be deployed to prevent Georgia from further democratic backsliding?
Maya, thank you very much for organizing, and FPRI for organizing this event. Again, I join my friends. All of you raised the issue of the urgency regarding the Georgian democracy. And Ian and David, your book is absolutely precise, describing the roots of the problem of the Georgian statecraft and democracy, and also pointing the ways where it should lead. But if we put the Georgian democracy in a broader context, I think what we see in Georgia is a problem of a broader democracy globally, where authoritarianism and Nino Eugenidze spoke at length on this, kleptocratic or unaccounted finances who really infiltrating the democratic systems and institutions, in some cases successfully, in other countries maybe less successful, but still eroding this system. So, and it creates some kind of an apathy or a feeling that it might be too late because this system is really on offensive, the authoritarian system with its money, corruption, and the network and the power they project. And that really, I've seen it in Georgia as well, this kind of a public mood with the Russian propaganda really fueling this narrative. So when we speak whether Georgia is on the verge, maybe we are almost over the cliff now, falling, and maybe we need a saving rope, otherwise external one, otherwise internal, I don't see the enough resources that can really contradict this. And it will be victory of overall Russian type of authoritarianism globally in other parts as well, because if Georgia falls, then it will be quite a dangerous wave of a sense of victory that, yeah, authoritarianism really works, and or this Putin style sovereign democracy might be a better solution for countries rather than the liberal democracy. That's what Putin also officially declares. And again, getting back to the broader context, I mean, in the free world, we were on the trajectory for a while. I remember when Obama became US president, there was a quite important and I think precise letter sent to him by European leaders in 2009, alerting him on upcoming threats. These threats are there, and I personally think that since then this letter has been unanswered. But by virtue of the political developments, I think President Biden and his administration has a chance to answer this letter 2009 with the particular actions. And I think actions are important, clear policies are very important, and also some more creativity might be also a useful tool, because since 2009, the world really has changed dramatically, even in terms of the information flow and awareness, as well as utilizing the new information technology by authoritarians for their propaganda purposes. So yes, there needs to be some creative solutions. So again, before going to the Georgian part particularly, also I think since the Democracy Summit will be the key milestone or the signature event for the Biden administration, and David raised the perfect question how countries on the verge like Georgia should be represented. And I personally would be strongly discouraged or disappointed if I would see current Georgian Prime Minister sitting among the leaders of the free world. But some creative solution, but also having Georgia unrepresented would be really bad. And because the Georgian people deserve better government, but also Georgian people deserve a seat to be seated in the summit of democracy, because we've been fighting it, and I've seen it myself since I shifted to the actual politics and established a new political party, and I was just running for the local elections. So I think that in countries like Georgia, not the government, but maybe civil society organizations or opposition political parties need to be represented, like from Belarus and other, because that would be a very strong message that it's not just the declarations, but it's an actual sign of a strongest US support to those who are fighting against or for the values of democracy. So now going back to Georgia, what we see, what is happening, well, again, the hottest issue is now the new Pandora Papers. And these Pandora Papers once again reveal the nature of the state capture that we have. It's an like an oligarchic, kleptocratic, and kind of a Russian type of a mafia system that really holds all the institutions. And this Pandora paper recently revealed an interesting connectivity between Ivanishvili's wealth and network of his offshore companies to the Poti port, together with some Chinese money. So Bidzina Ivanishvili as an oligarch and some Chinese money jointly are controlling one of the strategic assets in Georgia. It's a Poti port, but also they are obstructing US investment in Anaklia port. So this one case really reveals the nature of the Georgia, the problems of the Georgia has. So autocrats united, or autocratic regimes united, are pushing West away from Georgia and from the region. And we've seen other initiatives, more of a political nature, like a 3+3, and all those type of, we have to deal with our own problems and increase Russian military presence again, as Ian mentioned, in all South Caucasus countries. So again, since they've been offensive, there is no silver bullet solution to it, but kind of a more, let's say, more innovative and forward-looking, even asymmetric response to this would have been Georgia's accelerated NATO membership. But right now, I really cannot see how we all and our friends in US and in Europe can make a Georgia case for NATO with the type of elections we are doing, with the regime we are having currently, and with the degree of state capture and corruption. So we are in some kind of a deadlock situation. And if there is no external push of energy or some political will or support, it would be impossible to drag Georgia out of it, and it will be really unfortunate, and it will be really bad historical momentum for Georgia when we will reach a point of no return. Again, all this is also reinforced my kind of a pessimism, but still I am optimistic because we have a chance. This pessimism is reinforced by the huge degree of infiltration of Russian money and Russian special services in Georgia. Recent leaks of from the security service that they are tapping everyone, including US and the EU ambassadors, and every active citizen who they think might be problem with the regime. Unfortunately, but once beacon of democracy in the region, Georgia is really leaking right now, and we need a new power plug for this beacon to start shining again. So I will stop here, and I have a lot of arguments to follow up on this. Thank you.
Thank you, Batu. I want to switch over to Datu Sikharulidze. Batu says that without some external energy and pressure, this standstill is unlikely to be resolved. And I want to hear your take on what kind of external pressure that might be effective in the South Caucasus. But I also want to work in an audience question. a question came in about the role of organizations like the OSCE observing the elections, and if you think that that has an impact, or if it's a non-event. That's the question here. So, Dato, thank you.
Thank you, Maya. Let me also start, well, my colleague started, with thanking FPRI for organizing this event and having focus and interest on Georgia. Thank you very much. And I would like to say that we highly appreciate your interest on issues related to Georgia and Caucasus and Black Sea security. Well, it's difficult to be last of speakers because probably most of my points were already made. But let me say that yes, I actually agree with a bigger framework that has been set already. The Georgia was important, and as we frequently said, Georgia was bigger than Georgia because of two main reasons. Two main reasons. It was strategic importance, which was about strategic connectivity, or as we frequently hear about the trusted connectivity that was connecting East and West, bypassing Russia. First, it started with the energy projects, and then it had to continue with transportation projects as well as with the data connections. And the second component, and I think it is even more, a bigger component, was the democracy, good governance, and modernization of the governance, which was important for our region. And then that's how Georgia became bigger than more than Georgia for the region, because it was providing the good example for the region. So both these components have been deteriorating now that we have a backslide on this. Both these were supported, had huge support from the Georgian population. But what we are observing now, creepingly, against the will of Georgian people, we have backslide on democratic institutions, democracy, and I think Nino Evgeny excellently described the situation of the state capture. I think we are moving toward what in modern days we are already, if we are not already there, what is in modern days called competitive authoritarianism, the model that resembles the Russian current Russian model, with pretty big component of the kleptocracy and corrupt practices that penetrate every aspect of public life. And then the second component, as we already know, is practically no action toward developing the strategic connectivity in Georgia. And I'm pretty sure that we are also changing the course of foreign policy course, or the Euro-Atlantic integration vector. It is also strongly supported by Georgian public, and then has bigger support than all parties, all political parties altogether. But what we are observing, that we are observing the weakening of Georgia's resilience, and much bigger problems related to Georgia's dependency on Russian economy, Russian market, Russian penetration of the Russian propaganda, and on the issues related with the penetration of Russian corrupt practices into Georgia. I think that all this requires actually actions from to stop it, and then to change the course. I agree with our colleagues that more active active measures, active step policies are required. More engagement of our Western colleagues would be important for to stop this deterioration. I think the main point here is that Georgian public fully support our Western course, and then therefore I think that any change of this is done creepingly and the incremental. So that is what makes this policy very dangerous. So I'll stop here. I exceeded my 5 minutes, and I'm ready to answer questions you might have.
Thank you, Dato. I want to remind our audience that they can submit their questions using the Q&A feature, and I'll try to get to as many of them as possible. But I want to ask sort of an open question. I hope maybe each of you can comment on this. There is another elephant in the room, and that's the fact that Georgia's ex-president, Mikhail Saakashvili, returned to Georgia after living 9 years in exile and promising to return literally at every chance he got, campaigning, from afar for his United National Movement opposition party, promising that he would come back to Georgia, and surprising us all, he did show up in Georgia the day before this municipal election, and he was arrested. He remains in prison at the moment, and I know there have been some demonstrations calling on his release. I know Ukraine's President Zelensky has also called on the Georgian government to release Saakashvili, who is currently a Ukrainian citizen. Any comments from the panelists? What do you think is the right course of action here, especially if you are a Western partner of Georgia? Do you call for the government to release Saakashvili? Is he a political prisoner, or do you sort of let this play out? Anyone who wants to take this question?
I'll take a stab at it. I really think that the decision of Saakashvili to illegally enter Georgia was a political catastrophe for the country. My friend David Kramer used a much more descriptive word that I won't use since we're on the record here. The essential problem, I think, one of the essential problems with the development of democracy in Georgia is the extreme personalization of power. And his re-entry into the political dynamic really reduces politics in Georgia to Misha versus Bidzina. And it's just remarkably toxic and poisonous atmosphere. It really sucks all the oxygen out of the political dynamic. I mean, we saw it in the elections. People didn't really focus on the issues. And it really hardens the two sides in this. It's really kind of a win-win for both Misha and Bidzina. It's a win for Misha because I think that UNM has shown a tendency to want to use the streets, and of course having Misha in prison, former president of Georgia, on politically motivated charges. I don't know if I'd call him a political prisoner. I'll let other organizations determine that. But it gives an excuse for demonstrations that can very quickly degenerate into violence. And then, of course, on the Georgian Dream side, you have a leadership there that is focused Ahab-like on trying to destroy the UNM monster. And this, I think, I think they're rubbing their hands with glee with the chance to smash UNM altogether. So this is just completely upset the political dynamic, the political equation. The best thing that could happen is to fine Saakashvili for illegal crossing of the border and just get him out of the country. To put him on trial will be just a circus and not in Georgia's interests.
Yeah, I'll just say I agree with Ian that he should not have returned. He should not have been arrested. The fact that he did return was not a huge surprise. And that he was arrested was not a surprise at all. And I agree, let him out and let him go back to Ukraine. It's not going to do anybody any good to have however long a period of time focused on Misha's situation in Georgia. Now, I will acknowledge that his return and the whole controversy perhaps stirred up UNM voters to turn out more than they might have. That's a possibility. But he's not Navalny. And let's try to get Georgian Dream and the opposition to join civil society in focusing on the country's problems, not on the personalities involved, whether it's Ivanishvili or Saakashvili.
I want to turn this question over to Batu and Dato as well. I know you've both spent a lot of time getting involved in this effort to offer the Georgian public a third way and an alternative between this perceived Misha and Ivanishvili dynamic. And I know you've both worked tirelessly. Do you think it played a big role in the outcome of the election that Saakashvili returned?
Let me address this issue in from a slightly different angle. First of all, since we all agree that we have a state capture in Georgia and all the institutions are under the control of Ivanishvili and his proxies, frankly, there is no space to reduce politics to anything else because there is no politics. There is the one who has all the power and do not want to release. And I think every measure that will weaken this grab on the power, even extraordinary events, I think in overall adds to the positive balance of the opposition. The second, the way how Saakashvili entered in Georgia, especially on the aftermath of this big scandal that Georgian security services are surveilling everyone, starting from the priests to the political opponents and to the diplomatic corps, while they were not unable to intercept their major political rival as they declare entering the country legally, it shows in what a disarray state security or other institutions are. So whatever reveals the true face of this regime, I think is positive because there is no standard language now we can describe to our Western partners or to our citizens how bad or how deep is the erosion of the state with the Georgian dream. So I think that added to this argument that there are this is a very porous borders and Georgian and Georgians' security are quite heavily endangered, considering in what toxic environment we live, whether it's a terrorism or Russian hybrid warfare or their attempts to sabotage anything they want in the country. The third, how Saakashvili behaved once he decided to appear on the political scene on the eve of the elections, was quite responsible in comparison to how Georgian Dream behaves. He didn't call for public to defend him, or he just made this, I don't know what you can call the political performance, and led himself to the jail. There was nobody with him. He just turned himself to the police and he went into the jail. So he really did not ask for any public rallies or any polarization or anything. So I think that also is the factor needs to be considered. And finally, I think overall, if we will be able to take out the power that has been grabbed by GD and Ivanishvili out from him, it will require some extraordinary steps, participation in the elections, public really voicing up on this total control of everyone and every field of activities. And on top of it, I think his appearance on the political stage in Georgia really demystified his role. In the last 9 years, we've seen that there was some mysticism about Saakashvili, that yeah, he will come and then UNM will punish all of you, and etc. etc. So every demystification really helps to lead us to the healthier political process. And I think he is a political prisoner because his charges are politically motivated, and there are other arguments that can be legal or political that reinforces this. So I think he should be released, and also because there is no way that he can get a fair trial in Georgia. There is no independent judiciary in Georgia anymore. Than that was the reason why GD withdrew from the Charles Michel document, because and also EU deprived them the financial assistance because they declined to implement judiciary reform. And the least autocratic leader, or the one who captures the state, needs is an independent judiciary, just the opposite. He wants to control. So therefore, I think every political actor needs to be allowed to participate, whatever their support is on the ground. And then we have to live with the results of the fair elections. How to achieve the fair elections? That's the issue that I spoke earlier. That's some external pressure, maybe sanctioning some of the culprits who are part of the state capture in judiciary, security services, or Ivanishvili's surroundings, including his money laundering schemes. That will let more oxygen in Georgian politics. And I think then all actors, without any mystifications, would be allowed to the a level playing field in political process.
Yeah, I'm gonna be brief to yes, let me start with saying that all charges against him are politically motivated, and since we do not have a free judiciary, I think that all these charges that were brought, not only were brought against him, politically motivated. Second point is that I agree with Batu. He didn't make he did not add to the turbulence by calling his supporters to come to the meeting and to defend him and so on and so on. He turned himself to law enforcement, and I think that it's neither in interest of Georgian state nor Georgian public or the political situation to have him in jail. And my last point is that if you look, if you take a quick look, who is rejoicing because of his arrest and who is selling it as a big win for authoritarianism or the authoritarian rule in the region is Russian propaganda. So Russian propaganda is full of these messages of rejoicing because of Misha's arrest. And I think that it's not, it's for reason. It's for reason because people still remember early 2000s when period right after Rose Revolution, when Georgia was making significant progress toward democracy, toward modernization, toward good governance, and it was more than Georgia at that time. So I think that now having Saakashvili in jail is in no one's interest. It's not in the interest of anyone in the free world.
Thank you very much. I have an audience question for David Kramer. He says, how realistic is the claim that the US might use hard power and employ an interventionist strategy to change the course of events in Georgia? And if not, is the claim that the US and particularly the Biden administration is totally fine with Georgia being in this turbulent state valid? So two extremes, I guess.
Yeah, I was going to say, I'm not sure either one is right. It's not realistic to expect hard power from the Biden administration to affect change in Georgia. That's not going to happen. It wouldn't happen under a Trump administration. It wouldn't have happened under a Bush or Obama administration. And yet at the same time, the opposite is not true, which is that we think everything is just fine in Georgia. I think we are concerned. If you look at the statements that have been issued by the US Embassy in Tbilisi and by the ambassador herself, those reflect concern about where Georgia has been going. The violent incidents 2 weeks ago, in which the embassy issued a blistering statement questioning the Georgian government's commitment to democracy and Euro-Atlantic aspirations, was one of the strongest statements I've seen, particularly just a matter of 2 weeks before an election. And so I would say the United States is not all that comfortable with what's happening. You look at the comments from members of Congress, there have been a lot of strong resolutions, even some legislation that has not yet translated into actual law. But it reflects concern in officials in the United States about what has been happening here. But to think that those concerns would then lead to a U.S. intervention, military intervention, or exercise of hard power, not going to happen. And at the end of the day, it's up to Georgians to decide their own future. But the United States does have significant influence in the country. And we should use our influence in positive ways to try to do what we can to help Georgia stay on a democratic path, moving toward a Euro-Atlantic future. And that's something that I think a Republican Democrat can agree on in Washington.
I think if you listen to, certain Russian disinformation, they would argue that the US is already intervening quite heavily in places like Georgia and Ukraine. And I'm sure many of you read that very long article by Putin where he talks about just how much Ukraine is manipulated and controlled by the West. So this brings up this idea of disinformation, which is doing, quite well in Georgia, I think, at the moment. So this question, I think, is timely. One of our audience members asks, can you speak to the impact that government and civil society counter disinformation efforts have had so far in impacting Russian influence operations, and what more needs to be done? But go ahead.
Well, unfortunately, but again, Georgia is not a good example in fighting the Russian disinformation, because as we've seen in the Atlantic Council Digital Forensics Lab really revealed an interesting scale of the troll factory operated by the government, funded by the government, and most of this troll factory disinformation activity was directed towards polarization of the society, seeding anti-American and anti-Western narratives in the public. And unfortunately, but Georgia was among few authoritarian countries like China, Russia, and Iran, whose governments employ their own troll factory against the democracy and against their own society. So we cannot speak that government is doing anything. Though civil society is doing good, and this particular project and many other projects that other civil society organizations are doing with the support of US and European Union money is really crucial. But again, civil society in this regard has a hardest job, because we have to fight against our own government, who is doing or working like Russian playbook, and the Russian itself, who has other networks as well deployed in Georgia and financially supported disinformation networks, again to detach Georgia from its normal democratic development. And one of the major pillars of this disinformation is seeding apathy that, yeah, Georgia can never make a democratic, independent Western European Union and NATO member state.
Yeah, well, it's one of the biggest issues in Georgia, as well as in all neighborhood and even further. Actually, these are two major lines. One line is to spread apathy and nihilism, and then the second line is to see the some disinformation and yeah, well, disinformation. But unfortunately, what we can observe from the government side is that the government very frequently is using this disinformation campaigns in their own interests. So we had well-known cases of so-called the border issue between Azerbaijan and Georgia, that where two people were detained just because they were negotiating with for the many years with Azerbaijan, the demarcation of the Georgian Azerbaijani border, and then they were presented as if someone was trying to sell Georgian land, absurd charges. And then we have many absurd issues related to it. Not to mention the issues when Facebook closed down GD associated, well, the government associated websites that were promoting Russian propaganda, as well as pro-government and anti-opposition narratives. So I think that there is no organized fight against Russian propaganda, and even more, sometimes they are playing together. I mean, they see government sees it as a useful component for their to promote their narratives. Actually, what we see that it's minority of they are minority of Georgian population supports those pro-Russian narratives. And of course, I would not say that all GD supporters are pro-Russian minded citizens. Of course, it's not true, but all pro-Russian groups are GD supporters. That is the way it works. Yeah, by the way, I just wanted to add to the previous question that was put, one more argument when I spoke about the charges against Saakashvili were political. So right yesterday or day before yesterday, Prime Minister TV appeared and said that if he does not behave himself, they will add up more charges against him. That was clearly said today. So it one more time proves that mostly these charges are politically motivated, and yeah, that's the case.
Thank you, Dato. As we run out of time, unfortunately, I want to squeeze in this last audience question, which I think is a very important question. Several of you have mentioned U.S. influence in Georgia. Will you speak to the current primary means by which the U.S. directly exerts influence over Georgia's domestic and foreign affairs, whether that's hard power, soft power, smart power, whether those are primarily via US-dominated international institutions, via the threats of targeted or economic sanctions, or via some other platform, and how do those relations compare to US relations with, say, Armenia or Azerbaijan? I have a feeling this question might be a good one for Ambassador Kelly.
I don't know if I can do it in 3 minutes, though. Really, that's an excellent question. You know, in my experience, there's been a very interesting division of labor between the European Union and the United States in terms of our assistance to Georgia. The EU, based on its free trade agreement, has really focused more on economic assistance, technical support, that is, and the US is focused more on security assistance. And I think that in terms of where the US has real leverage, it is in this area of security assistance in helping Georgia deter further Russian aggression in particular. And so I'm concerned about first of all, the impending end of the train and equip program, and then of course the withdrawal of the Georgian support to the NATO mission in Afghanistan. So there are, I think, fewer points of leverage in terms of U.S. support for security.
Maya, can I just quickly add, I think a thanks are in order to the Georgian government but particularly the Georgian people for the role they have played in helping withdrawals from Afghanistan for those transiting to other places. Georgia really stepped up and provided great support and assistance in that respect. And so I think that has registered here in the United States, and we're very grateful for that.
Thank you very much. Unfortunately, we're out of time, so let me give my sincere thanks to our panel one participants, Ekagi Gauri, Nino Dolidze, Georgi Muchaidze, Miriam Popkhadze, and of course to Ambassador Ian Kelly and David Kramer, and most importantly to our partners, Batu Kutelia, our program partners, Batu Kutelia and Datosi Kharulidze, for organizing this event with us. We have more joint programming coming up. We'll continue to cover Georgia, the South Caucasus, as well as the greater Black Sea region through our Eurasia program at FPRI. So keep an eye out for our emails and keep visiting our website for additional coverage. Thank you everybody for joining us, and have a great rest of your day.
Bye.